So on the show today, we have Bebe Hansen. Bebe is the principal of presence-based coaching and has taught and developed the curriculum for many years with Doug Silsby, PCC, the program's founder. Presence-based coaching provides training for coaches with a dual focus on both personal and professional development. The personal development through becoming a more effective coach and human, and the professional development through skill building around coaching methodology. Bebe has a strong background in business, having grown up in a family business, the largest flea market in the Southwest, and operated the business herself for 7 years before it was sold to another family. She has a Master's of Science in Social Work and ran her own private psychotherapy practice for 5 years. In more recent years, Bebe has shifted her focus to the world of coaching, working with leaders in the private, non-profit and government sectors through the work of presence-based coaching. And Bebe also has a deep ongoing commitment to yoga and meditation. So Bebe, it's great to have you here. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to having a chat to you today.
Thank you, Allison. I'm very happy to be here.
So I think let's just jump straight in. Can you tell us a little bit about presence-based coaching, what it is and your particular approach to coach training? As I think I mentioned before we started, I'm a coach, so I'm really always interested in other methodologies and ways of looking at things.
Yes, presence-based coaching is really a unique blend. It's an integrative blend of many streams of wisdom and knowledge, and it includes things like embodiment and the somatic realm, so working in and through the body in its wholeness. That's one of the main streams. Mm-hmm. We also work with mindfulness, we work with adult development, and we work with interpersonal neurobiology, also known as neuroscience. Those are some of the streams. We work with complexity theory. So there is a lot that informs what we do in our coaching methodology. Everyone comes to the training not knowing how this blend works, so everyone's at ground zero. It's a great equalizer. And then all of this methodology is underpinned by the cultivation of presence. Mm-hmm. So presence for the practitioner and also presence for our coaching clients. So there is a lot, as you said, of personal and what we would call self-development integral to the training. So we call that the being piece. And then there's also coaching methodology training in this sort of unique blended way that's quite embodied. And that is the doing. So we have this dual thread of being and doing, which runs through the training. Doug used to say it was the sort of the DNA strand of how actually adult development and change happens.
So I'm curious, you mentioned both being and doing, and it seems in the world today that we spend an awful lot of our time in the doing, or maybe that's just me. I spend a lot of my time in the doing, and learning how to be more in the being feels really important. So from your perspective, why do you feel the being is so important?
It is very important, of course, and we're in these incredibly challenging times globally. You know, we're all facing a pandemic, and in the US, where I'm based in the DC area, even though we teach in Asheville, North Carolina, mm-hmm. There is a lot in the US. We're coming up on an election. We are having a lot of social unrest about the racial injustice that's happened in this country for 200 years or more. Yes. So there is a lot facing each of us individually and collectively. And so to me, the being has been omitted or skipped over or not valued or rewarded more, as in this country for sure. The doing is what is seen as the most important. And so from my point of view, and I think from our point of view in this work, the being piece is where the presence comes in, or we could say the presence piece is actually a being quality mm-hmm. of who we are in our wholeness. I think this has also to do with why we work below the neck. So we have kind of a preference for cognitive, which is wonderful. We're not throwing out anything here. And there's a place where we're missing 2/3 of the equation if we're missing the heart and the feelings, emotional tone, and our care about what's happening to other humans in this planet. And also the whole body sensation realm, which of course, this is really an important piece of change because our habits are embodied. And so we'll probably get into that a little bit later. But I would say that definitely that is the kind of core to opening up resourcefulness and a sense of resilience in ourselves in the being realm, to face all that we're facing, which is really uptick now. It's definitely more in our face,
Yes.
Everything that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about presence, do you have a definition or a way of thinking about that? Perhaps you can share that with us, because I know a lot of people talk to me about presence and it seems like people mean different things by it. So what does it mean for you?
I agree. And there are a lot of, let me say there are more. So we call ourselves leadership coaches. So that's what we're actually training as leadership coaches. And we define leadership really broadly. So it could be leading your own life, on the very micro scale, to leading a community, leading a family, leading a nation, leading a collective. So that's like leading a global organization. So it could be a lot of levels of leadership. And so many streams of thought are including presence now. And we have always found that to be sort of a core piece of presence-based coaching. As I said, a quality of being that we're cultivating. And I noticed that in the literature that's coming out around presence, and so there's some great books coming out, it sort of looks at it from the outside. These authors are having it and like qualities or indicators of presence, like we talk about leadership presence a lot in the corporate world. And it's from the outside in, that view. And so we actually hold presence a little bit differently. And I'm going to actually read you Doug's definition, Doug Silsby's definition from his latest and last book. He died 2 years ago, you probably know,
yes.
of unexpectedly of cancer. And so his last book was entitled Presence-Based Leadership. So we do have a leadership thread also to our work. But I love this definition, so I'm going to read it. Presence is an internal state. It is the inclusive awareness of stillness, possibility, and immediacy. So presence is an internal state. It is something we're cultivating in our being, inside of us. And that makes all the difference. So there is a new model in the book, the 9 Pains model, and that is kind of a core teaching about resilience from that model, which is a brilliant model from my point of view, of course. And there is a place where that is the core. Presence can give us access to the core of resilience and resourcefulness, because how we be inside, how we are in our bodies, and this includes our nervous system, our state of consciousness, our state of awareness, how we are determines how we act, what we see and how we act. And so to me, that's a fundamental place that presence supports us.
And I really like that. That does feel like a real turnaround, as you say, from the way people often talk about presence, which is how are you standing? What are you projecting? What are other people perceiving in you? Seems to be the way that people often talk about it. But this
and that's valid.
It is absolutely, it's valid, but it's another dimension or another level of depth to it, and going, actually, I like this sense of stillness. If I'm understanding, it's almost like I've got this core of stillness in me, and then if I can tap into that, then you're talking about possibility and immediacy. I really like that. I'm curious as to how, when you talk about immediacy, what you mean by that. Perhaps the possibility feels clear to me, that if I'm still, things can arise. Could you tell me a bit more about the immediacy side of things?
Yeah, so they are connected, and immediacy to us means the moment.
Okay.
So in the present moment, the immediacy of the present moment. So I think generally speaking, we've all been conditioned in a way as humans, in our families, in the cultural context we were born in, the political system, economic, however we were placed on this planet at birth, we actually are conditioned, to either be in the future or stay in the past. We can get stuck in the past, or we can be in the future. You notice I'm using my body here. I'm pointing behind me or pointing
Absolutely.
forward. And so the stillness piece comes from being in the moment. We can use the body as an anchor because the body can't be anywhere but in the present. Of course, our minds and our hearts can be way different places in the future, worrying, or in the past, regretting, or many other versions of that. And so the stillness comes from coming into the present moment. So not in the future or the past, in the present, and grounding ourselves in that stillness. And that's what brings the sense of immediacy. Because with that, there's this kind of spacious awareness of there's nothing else but now. And when we are in that present moment with the immediacy of that moment in our consciousness, awareness, body, sense, felt sense, that's when possibility opens. That's when we can actually see different things. We can perceive and sense things that we hadn't necessarily seen. So we could say elements of what's going on, especially in the complexity that we're all facing and in. We can see different things that we hadn't perceived before. And that is what, to us, is a leverage point for change in terms of a coaching conversation and in terms of leading a team. If we can be open to what's possible that we hadn't seen before, and those ideas may come from other people, those ideas can come from inside us, we don't know, then there is a chance to do something different. And that is the moment of change. We do postulate that the present moment with its immediacy and the stillness that's possible there is the only moment when change really happens. Change doesn't happen later, doesn't happen back. I mean, it can maybe impact back there and it can impact future, but it's that moment where actual change happens. And so as we begin to access that as a practitioner, because that's the other tenet of the work, is that we're doing our own work first. So we cannot take people further than we've been. And so we are doing our own embodiment, our own presence cultivation work primarily. And then we're able, as Doug used to say, we're earning the right to help others change, and helping them cultivate their own presence so that they have choice. That's the bottom of it.
So it sounds like a place of deep creativity, of actually allowing things to arise. And if we are busy, as you say, thinking about the future, thinking about the past, it's very hard for that to actually come through us somehow.
Definitely. And there's a whole topic we could get into of practice, but we'll get to that, I think.
Cool. So I'd like to talk to you a bit more about presence and some, I know sort of in your development model and thinking about how this links with presence, but how you bring the whole person to personal development and growth. In the introduction, I was talking about how it's growing as a human, and in growing as a human, then coaches, as you say, kind of have the right to perhaps help other people. And there's a few different areas that we've touched on briefly when we spoke before. And this is around, sort of, for example, engaging perception, awareness, and understanding, the whole body, engaging that in the body and whole person learning, culture and relationships, and then the environment and the systems that we're in. And I'd love to hear you just talk a little bit more about each of these so we can get a bit more of a deeper understanding of the interplay between those things and presence and personal development.
Yeah, that sounds great. And so should we start with perception, awareness, and understanding?
Absolutely,
Engaging that?
yes.
Yeah, I actually like your framing, as we were talking about. I've never heard this framing or seen this framing, but apparently we have it somewhere on our website. So I actually like it because it's going to spur new information for me, in a way that I hadn't planned. So that's good. That's being in the present moment here. So engaging perception, awareness, and understanding. So in terms of our training, yes, it's the question of how we support coaches and the methodology to support others. So really, we cannot see we cannot change what we don't see. So the fundamental really move is to see, when this is where the adult development stream comes in, and this is the Keegan line of adult development in the US from Harvard, to make the subject-object move. So we can't change what we don't see. So as we begin to see what we're embedded in, it's like the fish in the water in a pond cannot see it swimming in the pond. It just doesn't see the water. And so as we take our glasses off, our certain lens off of some of our habitual conditioning, the way we see the world, have learned to see the world, and actually it works for us to see it this way. When we begin to see other ways of seeing,
Mm-hmm.
if we see something different, then we actually engage awareness in a different way. We engage our understanding. We can perceive something differently. And this is where in our training we use the body, which I'll get to in a moment, to help us. We have a beautiful metaphor for this, which is the bell jar.
Oh, tell me.
So we have a beautiful graphic, and we've always talked about it as the bell jar. So our habit nature, how we were conditioned, which has worked for us all this time until it doesn't work, and that's why people come to coaching a lot, or the context changes, and we are forced to, as many of us have with this coronavirus, and many of us had to grow, forced to do different things and to face very difficult situations. So the bell jar is made up of a lot of our conditioning. So our stories we tell ourselves, the sensations in our bodies, our posture that we go through the world with, the way we filter out information, the way we don't let information out of our bell jar. So it's sort of this self-sealing system. It has our emotions in there, and it works, as I said, and until it doesn't. And so what we call lifting the bell jar is when we're in a coaching conversation for sure, or any development conversation as a leader perhaps, when we can see something else, we have an insight and we say, oh, I actually am sabotaging myself with my team, for example, because I'm actually interrupting them all the time and I'm telling them what to do rather than, no wonder they're not engaged in my 360, feedback. So we have those moments of lifting the bell jar, and we can see what we didn't see before. We can see what we've been subject to, and that makes that little space between our identity, who we take ourselves to be, and making a different choice.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really how we engage awareness and understanding, is we work with our own habits, which is usually what keeps us from being present in the moment, and we see how we're not present. It's kind of counterintuitive. But as we see when we're not present, then we become present, because part of us is actually seeing we're not present. And so that's our awareness and understanding and perception.
So it's observing ourselves, finding a way to make a space between ourselves as object and actually being able to separate the seeing mind from kind of perhaps the experience that we're having.
Yes, you could call it cultivating the witness, cultivating the observer, and also our bell jar gets lifted. Somehow we can see beyond our conditioned tendencies, habits, strategies, patterns, to something new. We can see a new view, and that gives us the choice.
Okay. And you mentioned there, and you mentioned before about habits and how we embody our habits. And I'd love if you could just talk about that a little bit more, and how we can have, I guess, a greater understanding of what we're doing, and then how do we shift those habits should we choose to?
Yeah, so I think that is a piece that has been, the embodiment place is a piece that has been left out of coaching for many, many years. And I think that we actually are aligned with and ascribe to the International Coach Federation in the US as our accrediting body and credentialing body. And so they are really shifting. This is an international group, and there's all volunteer coaches. Many of you know this. And it is actually evolving to include more of the wholeness of humans. And it's really beautiful to see, and I've been in this about 12 years now. So I'm kind of halfway through, it's a 25, 27-year-old organization. So I've been seeing this evolution, and it's really, really useful. And so when I came to presence-based coaching, one of the things that attracted me to it when I decided I didn't want to be a therapist and wanted to be a coach, was the embodiment piece. Because I feel like that's the missing element in a lot of change efforts, as I said. And so the way we work with it is that we actually have developed a lot of practices, a lot of exercises. We work very experientially. And so that experiential learning cycle is really, really useful to kind of unpack this below the neck experience. And so in our retreats, they're very small. We have up to 24, sometimes 14, something like that, in that range. And there is a lot of experiential work in and through the body, because there is so much information in the body. There's so much data in here that we miss, from sensations and also from our emotions and moods and feeling tones. There's that. And there's also an opportunity to practice something different. So
Mm-hmm.
the body affords us this, I mean, the body has to deliver. The body has to take action. We think our head takes action, but that is not right.
It's not
Our
right.
body types on the keyboard, you know? So we have to change, doing something different, experientially learning and doing something different. That's the only way it's going to happen. And so I think including that as a practice ground, the body
Mm-hmm.
as a practice ground, you know, even just the notion that our habits are embodied is new to people. You know, it's just like, really?
People
You know,
don't think
and
about their bodies. I find this with my coaching all the time. People, they're just, and I wasn't, to be fair, until I started really studying this work. I wouldn't say I was really in touch with what was going on in my body, you know, fleetingly if you've got pain or something. But other than that, not really being aware of, am I contracting? Am I expanding? What's happening? So I think I agree with you. Anything we can be doing to expand that awareness gives us huge amounts of information.
huge, and huge amounts of information around our habits. Because we can say, oh, I want to say yes to collaborating with another colleague on a project. Yeah, oh, definitely. You know, and then when we get into it, there's this big contraction in the center, like, oh, I'm not trusting them.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, are they really going to be the partner I hope they'll be in this project? Or, you know, so then there's really habitual data, habitual ways we say no or we say yes, for example. We're just referring to speech acts theory, but there's so much information from our habits. And then also, as I said, there's this practice ground opportunity. There's this way that we can actually take new action and pay attention at the same time. So the body is a resource. The body is a ground and a resource for showing up the way in being, the way we actually have leverage to be the way we want to do. So there's a being part of the body that's a nervous system regulation. There is a way of staying grounded under pressure, under threat. You know, I mean, the neuroscience talks a lot about the brain and threat, and we're always scanning for safety and all of psychological safety and all of that. So, and there's a place where we can actually come to rely on this intelligence. You know, not only the heart intelligence of heart math, but also the core, like that lower body core of, we kind of know in our gut, you know, there's a lot of material on enteric brain. We know in our gut before our brain knows.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we think our brain's making choices, and it is not so. If we slow it down, which is part of the work we do in training, if we slow things down, and we do this in coaching too, right, with our clients, we actually stop that habitual patterns going, and then we can see that there is really an intelligence here that we are skipping over or denying or pushing away. And, you know, it's just taught out of us mostly. I mean, I know there's other cultures probably in the world that doesn't happen, but in the Western culture, it's definitely taught out of us. We've taught to ignore it.
Yeah.
And so we're opening back up. You know, this is how the embodiment piece is really so fruitful in terms of our awareness and our being and our presence cultivation, because presence comes from the body. It's not a mental thing. I mean, it's in the whole body. Also, it's in the thinking center and heart center. But the belly, the lower belly, the body center is the place of action. And it's also the place where presence lives. It's an embodied thing. This is why Doug is saying it's an internal state. We had many conversations about it, and it is inside us, but it radiates outside. You know, that's why presence can be felt from the outside.
Yes.
You know, perceived from the outside, like leadership presence. And we can't cultivate it from the outside. We can do practices also, of course. And there's a way where it needs to be accessed from the inside.
So I'm curious, do you have a practice or something you could share with us, so that if some of our listeners wanted to use their bodies to become a little bit more present, is there something that you could share with us that we could try now, or that you can explain to them, that perhaps they could try at home if they wanted to, as a way of perhaps seeing a little bit more clearly what their embodied habits are and how they might want to shift them?
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to do that. So let's do it. Let's just do it right now. So just take a moment. You can put down, I'll just lead us through a short centering practice. So just put down what you're holding, if you're holding a pen.
Yep.
Or not. If you're driving a car, probably don't do this listening to the podcast. You can do it when you get home. So just take a deeper breath together. Let's just take a deeper breath. And bringing your attention inside. So gathering your attention and your energy and bringing it inside to the awareness of what's happening in your felt sense of your body. So you can feel your sits bones on the chair. You can feel your feet on the floor. And if you like, you can sense the earth that's supporting you underneath. So whatever way makes sense for you, just root yourself down into the earth. So connect somewhere from your tailbone or your bottom of your feet. Just connect down. I like to think of it as a big oak tree, and I'm rooting down into the nourishment and the stability of this earth that brings us life, that we inhabit. And as you do that, just notice what happens as you're paying attention to your internal sensations and the feet and the seat on the chair. Just notice if things start to slow down a little bit. Your nervous system, your sort of spinning wheel of mind. Just notice what's happening. And if there's like, oh, I have a crick in my neck, or if you notice anything like that, just include it. We're actually bringing ourselves, our whole selves, to this moment as best we can. You might remember to yourself why you're even listening to this call, why presence or coaching or embodiment is important to you. And you just can feel the ground of that, like you're sitting or standing on the ground of your values, your purpose, your commitments, what's important to you, whatever that is. And now move your awareness up into your chest area, your heart, your emotions, your feelings, mood, whatever is present here. So just kind of making room for yourself and whatever it is you're feeling. So we want to include any frustration or weariness or gratitude, whatever is occurring. And there may be more than one thing. Just making space for your emotional self here. It's often helpful to name what you're noticing to yourself. Creates a little distance and space there, but we're including by naming, just making discernments. And now move your attention into your head space, your mind, and just noticing what thoughts are happening, what story you're in. So you may have thoughts about, boy, this is taking a long time. When are we going to get back to talking? Or it might be, relief, some quiet for a moment. So just notice what's happening, and we're not hanging on to the thoughts. We can include them, but we're not attached. Just watching them go by like clouds in the sky. And we're just paying attention. We're just present. And if you find yourself on a train to the future or the past, or thinking about that email you meant to do before this call, just bring yourself back, gently back to your whole body and your breath. We'll take one more breath together before we come back. And before you completely, some of you may have had your eyes closed, which is great, or looked down or looking out the window. Just take a moment to notice what's different now. Just note to yourself, how are you being differently in this moment? That was probably 3 minutes of centering practice. What's different now than when we started the practice? So I'll ask you, Allison, when you're ready. What's different?
For me, the difference was, I guess I became more aware of what, as you said, of what's habitual. It's like, oh, the same thoughts come up all the time. I'm, like constantly, I've got to rush and get the next thing done. Or I was sort of noticing to myself the feelings kind of around my heart area, where I was like, oh, this is a really familiar feeling. I feel this a lot, this kind of thing. And then what's it like? What would it be like to feel something different? Or, and just not even to do the different feeling, but just to notice I have a habit around, I feel like this a lot, or I have this kind of thought a lot. And yeah, just getting that little bit of distance, I think, was really interesting. I've in the embodiment work that I do a lot of things generally with people. It's like, well, how familiar is this posture to you? And then when I ask you to maybe take on a different posture, is that familiar, unfamiliar? Do you want more of this in your life? Do you want less of this in your life? So that kind of inquiry is quite familiar to me. But this felt slightly qualitatively different because I hadn't considered before how familiar my thoughts are, I suppose, how often I'm kind of on that same old journey, or how familiar the actual, not necessarily the feeling of being in a posture, but actually just the feelings I'm having.
Mm-hmm.
Am I stuck in a pattern of, actually, I feel like this all the time? And
Yeah.
what then might it be like to kind of go, actually, I want to shift this. As I was saying to you yesterday, I was saying to you earlier, I did an improv class yesterday because I was like, oh, I want to have more laughter in my life. I've been stuck in lockdown for ages, and I really just want to, I'm not seeing so many people. It's like, right, I'm going to do something actively to get more laughter. And so that was a really conscious decision to feel something different, not to how I normally feel, because I laugh a lot normally, but I've been noticing I've been laughing less since I've been kind of locked indoors a bit more.
Yeah, no, and improv is like the core of presence. There's this moment where we're just moving with what's occurring.
Yes.
And I love, we have some improv in our work too. And I just
fantastic.
love that because it's in the moment. It's like, as a therapist, I love Gestalt therapy because that was my favorite modality, because it's in the moment. And so I think I was sort of made for this presence-based coaching work. But there is a place where you're having a lot more awareness. Just thank you for saying all that's happening for you, because just slowing down the doing allowed us to access being in a different way. And so I'm also seeing that there is some insights you had. You were lifting your bell jar there saying, oh man, I have these thoughts a lot. This is super familiar. And we have to be quiet enough to hear the thoughts, to see that same familiar place. And then also the mood, or the emotions, the feelings. Many of us live in resignation or frustration or, whatever. And there's a lot of external things that are happening, that are creating, that are contributing to that. So we're navigating a lot right now. And so feeling those kind of chronic feelings, it's really important to see that, because then the next resourceful thought you had was, well, what would it be like to do something different? And this is like a core of a coaching conversation. Yes. And then so that's like, you could open a whole conversation from that. And then I just want to add to what you said around posture. So, and the way we hold ourselves in the world, that the embodiment piece, or the somatic, the soma, Greek body in its wholeness, the somatic shape we take, and this is from Strozzi Institute. Richard Strozzi was one of my teachers. So there's that. And there's also chronic ways we hold our shoulders or our neck or our hips or anything in our, we have a lot of armoring around certain ways we hold our shape, our body, our posture, our countenance in the world. And you know, I've studied breathing, and you know, you said you're a breathing practitioner. That's also a way that we have these patterns. I mean, a lot of my clients breathe in the top half, you know, through top
Yes.
third. They're up in their chest and not in the diaphragm, and which is a way to really, as we breathe lower, which is part of what we did in centering, that's a way of regulating our nervous system. It lets our nervous system know we're safe.
Yeah.
And we don't have to be in this cortisol, adrenaline, fight or flight place, you know, and that's where a lot of us are living right now, understandably so. And it's not that resourceful of a state.
No.
And so to cultivate an internal state that's more resilient and resourceful by a simple centering practice, wow, you know, and of course it has to be practice. This is not something we're going to do one time and it's going to be over. This is actually changing like the tissue of our body and our consciousness. I just, this is something that I feel really passionate about that can happen through the work and through practice over time. It happens over time. And this is also what neuroscience says. You know, we can, neuroplasticity, we can change our wiring, which is, by the way, a whole body wiring, not just our brain wiring, although that's a part of it, just by practicing different things. So this is where the body is really important.
I want to pick you up on what you said about the armoring that we can often have in our body and our posture. I'm conscious that some people may not be so familiar with that term. And I wonder if perhaps you can explain how you think about armoring from your perspective, why we have it, why we do it, and what we can do to actually kind of release some of that.
Yeah, so I have a lot of different, I'm not a body worker. I've received body work for many, many, many years. And I'm grateful for those people skilled in that. So what I would say is that there's chronic ways. It's Willem Reich was the original proponent of this. I've learned it from many different streams. Mm-hmm. But I would say that we have chronic ways of holding our muscles, you know, in our body, and contractions in our core, you know, the torso, that get laid down over time and then become sort of a chronic holding, is another way of saying it, a holding pattern. And so it's known as armoring from his stream of work. And it is a way that we sort of stop life flow or energy flow through parts of us. And so part of the work in working in and through the body is to open up those channels of energy. And it's not like, you know, I'm not going to say I'm a chakra specialist or, you know, a Chinese medicine specialist. There's lots of different bodies of work, you know, wisdom traditions, spiritual wisdom traditions as well, that hold about energy. So we can go study those. But what we're just experimenting with rather, is how in the moment we are holding ourselves back, or we are shutting down certain flows of energy and wisdom and intelligence and life force, really. And so that's, I think, another, I haven't really talked about that before, but I think that's another really benefit of coming below the neck with our awareness, because we can see, you know, in those lifting the bell jar moments when we're doing a centering practice or some other somatic practice or exercise experientially, we can perceive how we are holding ourselves rigidly or tensely. I mean, I think everyone who's listening could feel a place in their body right now, even. Like I can feel a place in my neck right there that is just kind of chronically tight. And so that was what we would call armoring. It's a place where we're protecting something, or we're just bracing against something. Yeah, that's what I would say. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I'd say just for people to understand a bit more what we're meaning by it. And I think again, it's that way of actually firstly becoming aware that we're doing it. Many of the things that we do, we're not even. I had sciatica many years ago, and I wasn't even aware of how I got to that point. It was really interesting. It was quite early on in my journey of embodiment, actually, that I got it. And but it was interesting just to start to notice what I was doing to myself, as you say, chronic positions I held myself in. And then once you're aware of it, it gives you that choice. Am I going to change it, or do I want to stay as I am? And we have that choice. We may not want to change it, or may not be ready to change it yet. But at least if we're aware of it, we've got the beginning of choice around it.
Exactly. And I would say that is a fairly common, along the journey of presence-based coaching anyway, it's a fairly common phenomena that folks, when they begin to slow down and enter their body in a different way, and maybe this is true in other streams, any embodiment stream, you're going to feel things that you didn't know you had. And so you're giving a perfect example, and it's not pleasant. So it's like,
not.
oh, wow, I have sciatica. Wow, how did I get to that point? And so we want to include that, obviously, and we're including everything. So it's not always pleasant to be present, and presence helps us in difficult conversations too, because we begin to build our tolerance for discomfort internally. And we're not promoting being in discomfort, but we are saying we have to build the capacity to see what's really going on inside of us and with others that we serve, so as coaches, or leaders, so that we can support them to have the capacity to witness what's really happening, and as you said, to change it. And I would say also, just another little note, pain in the body is a pretty strong teacher. Sometimes it has to get to that, the body is talking. It's just like the earth is talking to us right now with climate change. The body is talking to us also with pain, or shortness of breath, or whatever it is we're working with. And so there's to my point of view, there's a wisdom there. There's an intelligence there to pay attention to, and it's not always a pleasant one.
No. Well, when we're at the point of getting severe pain like sciatica, your body's shouting pretty loudly to get your attention at that point. So
agreed.
Yeah. So I'd like to take us back to the 4 areas.
Yes, let's do.
We've talked about perception, awareness. I guess we've talked a fair bit about engaging the body. We've talked about that now, but then there's also culture and relationships. So how do you see that interplay with presence?
Yeah. So what we pay attention to a lot in the relational work we do as coaching is what we call the relational field, and other streams of thought have that as well. And there's a place where we really pay attention to the field of presence, the field of awareness and connection between us and the client. So I can feel that right now with you. We did a little bit of a centering together before we came into the call, just to connect, to be together. And I do this with my coaching clients and my leadership work also. So it's really important to be aware of the field of the relationship, or the dialectic of that's holding. So we could say it's a container. So it's like an atmosphere. It's palpable. There's a sense of holding and connection, and even sometimes nourishment. Clients can feel like they've changed the word now from intimacy to safety on the new ICF coaching competencies, which I like actually a little better. But there is a feeling of safety that can be cultivated, and over time, especially, for those of us that work with people over time, whether you're in any kind of profession, including coaching, you begin to feel a field, what we call a relational field, and there's qualities of that field. There's compassion, there can be spaciousness, there can be neutrality, there can be unconditional positive regard, we talk about a lot. There's a resonance, that builds over time. And some people even say there's a third, a different entity that comes to be in any kind of long-term relationship or time relationship, like in coaching. And so this is really important. It's an important, what I would say is an important scaffolding for development and for the coaching work, because we do developmental coaching. So we have this adult development stream, not just performance. We can do performance coaching, but we really get underneath and do this, like, how are you developing? What is being called for you right now, from you right now? How are you being called to grow in these circumstances we're all dealing? Those are great questions anyway, just facing the pandemic, for example. But in a coaching conversation, also that becomes, a really important question. And so the field holds that. The field holds a container of safety, so that exploration work can be done, and that hopefully some insights and then practices to hold that after the coaching conversation. So that's the relational piece. Is that seeming like what you're asking, what you want?
That's perfect. And then I guess the last area I wanted to touch on is, and I think you've mentioned this a couple of times really, in terms of the earth and our relationship to that, but how presence comes into and personal development around the environment and the systems in which we find ourselves.
Yes, and I want to add the cultural piece in here,
Okay.
to the systems, because in the United States, we're having a lot of awareness, a lot's being revealed about the systemic racism in our culture, for
Yes.
example, and many other things too. We have lots of different things where we're issues where we're grappling with. And that is part of, like, it's the water we're swimming in. And so part of what we are really training ourselves to be aware of is what's going on around us. So that I think the general habit nature bell jar, to use that same metaphor, tends to be a little egocentric, like where it's sort of about us, or sometimes the pattern is the opposite of that. It's always about other. I never think of myself. It's always about giving, 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 or sometimes it's all about me, and it's not intentional. It's just the way the ego is built. That's the way our identities are built, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there's a place where it's limiting. It's limiting. And so I think what's being revealed right now in our current context is that we have a lot we have not been paying attention to. There's a lot of systems, and this goes to the complexity theory piece. There's a lot of systems that are interconnected that we actually haven't seen before. And one thing impacts another, impacts another, impacts another. And there's just this web. I mean, it's kind of like the World Wide Web metaphor. You know, we're all connected in a way that we haven't necessarily seen before, and systemically. So when one thing changes here, it's changing something over there. And it's where we can't predict that. It's not knowable. We can see the patterns about that, but there is definitely an awareness of a bigger thing we're operating in. And I think that even just the example of the COVID-19, you know, is showing us that there is some sort of interconnection that we could have never seen so explicitly that we see right now. I mean, it's you can't deny, one can't deny, I can't deny that we are connected in a way as humans in a human system and a global system, and with the environment. So we are so connected to this earth, and you know, who is also, you know, going through a lot. And so we as humans, as stewards, are not really paying attention until now. It's like the sciatic, you know. It's like we've got all these fires in the west of our country. I mean, they were in Australia. I mean,
Yes.
this is a global phenomenon, and so it's like, let's pay attention, because the environment actually can support us or not. You know, it's like we're dirtying our own box here, you know, and sandbox, and we need to be paying attention to that. So I think that's an important piece of awareness to open up to. So it's not just me and my little problems, you know, and I think that's really in our face now. And so how do we impact the bigger systems? You know, the systems, especially in this country, you know, systemic racism, that's something that's very big to impact. And we can do our own part around that. And there's ways we can impact the systems that we're embedded
as
in.
we become more aware, it's also then stepping into more of a personal responsibility, and stepping into perhaps more of even a collective responsibility around how, now that the mirror has been shown to us effectively, with, you know, the scales have fallen from our eyes, we can see a bit more about what's happening. What are we going to do about it? How do we choose to get involved, or I guess choose not to get involved? Because of course we don't have to choose to get involved. There is a choice either way.
There is a choice. And what I would say about that is, let's make it a conscious choice. You know, let's be impactful about that. So we'll either choose to be involved in whatever level we want to and can feel able, and then, or we don't choose. So rather than just putting our head in the sand and staying inside the dark, you know, and saying this is awful, it's not easy. I mean, this is where we get into the tolerating the discomfort of seeing what's true, you know, seeing what's actually happening. And so it isn't easy. These lessons are not, you know, feathers and little tickles. You know, these lessons are hard for most of us right now. At whatever level we're at, they're not easy. And there is, to me, I have this internal optimism of it's just unfolding. And if I stay in the present moment, these have been hard lessons for me personally. And as I stay in the present moment, you know, I know what to do next. And that's just how I operate these days as best as possible. Of course, I get pulled in and I get caught in my patterns and I get reactive. And there's a place of just practicing presence that allows us to see what's next, to be open to kind of what is next for me. What's my action? What's my right action or my best next step? Or how do I need to develop? How do I need to grow myself in order to meet the challenges that I'm facing? And that's a question for everyone listening, not just for me. That's a question for all of us.
I was going to ask you next about how we can stay resilient or build resilience when the world is changing so fast around us. And I feel like that leads on really nicely from what you've just been saying. And certainly perhaps a part of it is, if I'm present and open, then maybe that's part of it. But I wonder if you have anything else to add to that in terms of how people can grow their resilience or their ability to be resilient when we're living in times like this, which are, as you say, very tough.
Yeah, so there is a lot of what I've said so far in terms of our work and how we train coaches and how we serve others as coaches does have a seed of resilience in it and resourcefulness in it. So you can listen from that view if you want. And I would say that to me, it's the way we be. The resilience is in the being, and the doing in alignment with that being. So our inner state, our awareness level at whatever it is, our choices that we can see as we become more aware of what we've been subject to and what our patterns are. That is the core of resilience, is being able to come back to that still. And I do this with my hands, where I have my hands laid on top of each other, because to me, it feels like alignment. It feels like when we are aligned in the body, the heart, and the mind, and we are in touch with the ground, then there's a way that, and present, obviously, still present, open, then there's a way that we can see different things. Yeah. If we're just operating from our story, our narrative inside, then we have very limited view. So that's, to me, and that happens through practice. That happens through cultivating our own presence, through practices in the body and in the heart and in the mind that open up new views of what's possible, and also allows that ground and that settledness.
Great. And I wanted to take you back as well to the leadership model. Have you touched on it really briefly earlier, the 9 pains model? And I know you use that as a general leadership coaching, but I'm wondering if you could talk to us about it in terms of if people want to develop personal leadership for themselves, so very much for the individual rather than perhaps in a coaching context, perhaps to explain what it is, how embodiment comes into it, and how we can utilize it for our own personal growth.
Yeah, and so I love that question, and I just want to remind us that it's always starting from personal growth and presence-based coaching. It's always starting from who we are, and then what skills we can have as a coach. So it's really important to do our own work first. And so yes, of course. So I'll just give you a very brief overview here. So it's got 9 little window panes. There's 3 across. You can picture an X and Y axis, and 3 down. So across the top are three levels of systems. So it's context, so what's happening outside of us, identity, and soma.
Context, identity, and
soma. So there's 3 levels of systems. So even if you're only if you just want to experiment with those 3, there's a lot you can look at and see there. So context is where we're sort of trained to look outside. We look at what's going, especially in organizational life. We're looking out there and we're saying, what's the plan? What's the strategy? What's going on, and where are opportunities and threats, and what do we want to do with that? And that's a limited view. That's one view, and it's valid, but it's limited. So then we have this identity piece, which is who we take ourselves to be. That includes our soma and our feelings, everything we've talked about. That's the bell jar. That's our habit nature. I'm someone who always gets things done, or I'm someone who can't face conflict, so I collapse. Whatever it is, we have this identity, and it's interacting with the context, and it's interacting with the smallest scale, which is our soma. So our individual psychobiology, our body, the way our psychological kind of patterns have been laid down, how we see things, but also mostly how we feel things. So when we're triggered, we have these chronic armoring places. So those three levels, if you had any issue that you're working with, any problem that you want to look at, you can look at it from those three different levels of the systems that we're involved in. Of course, these are always open systems. They're always interacting with each other. So we are an open system as a human, not just bodily, you know, psychologically too. So we've got that open system. And then we have this identity, which can feel very closed and narrow, but it actually can be open, and it's definitely impacted by our soma and definitely impacted by the context. And then we have the context. So what I was going to say is, imagine in a meeting, it could be a community meeting, it could be a family meeting, it could be an organizational, you know, executive team leadership meeting. Just imagine a group of identities sitting around a table. And then the somas are getting triggered, and wait a minute, he's taking my territory. Wait, that's my part of the budget or whatever. And then you've got the context of, we need to make a decision in a direction, you know, to deal with this threat on the outside. So you can imagine, it's like, if we're not aware of all those levels, you know, let me say it another way, having awareness of all those levels can actually change a lot about how we perceive things and how we act.
Yes.
So as we're aware of that. So that's the one axis. And the other axis that goes down is the sensing, being, and acting. So from the top down. So sensing, being, acting. So we've got context, identity, soma, sensing, being, acting. And what that is, we call it metacompetencies. So as we cultivate our own presence, we can actually sense more about what's actually happening in a situation. We begin to see context, identity, and soma in a different way. We begin to open the lens of, oh, wow, my identity is threatened here. I'm actually thinking I'm going to lose my position if I don't, you know, lead this team in a certain way, for example. So we can sense differently. We can sense more, especially around the identity and soma, which we haven't really been taught to pay attention to much. And then we be. So we impact our being by being aware of it and how our being is in play, the being part of our life, the presence, the internal state of our nervous system and awareness and consciousness. And so as we work, we can intervene in our being. We can say, oh, wow, my throat's getting a little tight and my chest is pounding. And I think I need to do a little centering here in this meeting. I need to actually feel my feet and take a slower breath and a deeper breath and feel my seat on the chair. And wow, you know, I need to slow down here so that I can actually embody something differently. So I can bring myself back to neutral. And then I have a different place I can be. And then the acting, as I said earlier, comes straight from being. So we act differently when we're in touch with a deeper level of what's actually happening.
I'm just thinking this through in my mind. So when you're in your context with your identity and your soma, if I'm able to sense what's happening for me and then see how that is in my being, I suppose. And if I do just sort of go, oh, I am feeling a bit triggered or rushed or whatever else, I'm assuming that that's my opportunity, because I've now raised my awareness. That's my opportunity, as you say, to center or to ground myself, whatever it may be. So I shift my being.
Exactly.
That allows me to shift my acting, my doing, but it also perhaps shifts my identity and the environment as well, the context. Because if I shift how I'm coming across, I've got that deeper sense of stillness and possibility. Others are going to become aware of it, even if not consciously. They may sense the shift, and that might shift the dynamic. Am I following you correctly?
You are, and I'm going to make it a little more precise, but you've got it. So as we notice and this is the being on these three levels of scales. So as we notice we're triggered, we intervene. What we say is we intervene in that, and we do center ourselves. We have a regular practice that we've practiced way before the stakes got high, so that we can actually do it in the moment of high pressure. And then what we do is we decouple ourselves from the context. So we're not separating, but we are separating. So we're still connected to the context, but we actually get unhooked. So as we center ourselves, or whatever practice we do to regulate ourselves, we unhook from the context. So how many of us have been pulled into difficulty in any context because we're just sort of entrained with it? And so the ability to unhook, or what Doug calls decouple, is a huge skill. It's a huge skill. And once we are free from that triggering and that connected into that, but we're still with the context, then we can actually embody what we care about. So this is where the place of, why are we here? What are we really doing here? What's our value? What's our purpose? What's our commitments? And more than that, we can embody something differently. We can say, oh, actually, I am a stand for, what I care about is harmonizing with what's happening on this team in some way. And so that allows, on the being line, us to then drop down into extending that to others. So as you say, it impacts in the acting realm, also known as the doing realm, it impacts others as we are able to extend our calm, present selves, being selves, into the doing. So actions that come from that place have a different carrier frequency, we might call it, the carrier frequency of presence. Like, wait a minute, we can be present to all that's happening and not be triggered. And that impacts, of course, others that we're around. And we're not doing it to manipulate or doing it for other reasons to impact others in a way. But what we're doing is we're building our own resilience and building our own resourcefulness so that we can act from what we know, and the wisdom inside of us, the intelligence of our body and our heart and our mind that is freed from that conditioned habit, and those have served us very well. So we look at them very compassionately. And, sometimes it really doesn't help to yell at your dog, for example, or whatever, from being frustrated. So.
Absolutely. So this is feeling like a bit of the neuroscience coming in. What's coming to my mind is about mirror neurons. If I'm able to be calmer, then often that can help the other person I'm interacting with be calmer as well. So there's something going on in our brains as well around this, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this is really relevant to any kind of relationship. So any kind, like in a coaching relationship particularly, or a leader with their team relationship, and in any family relationship, any, intimate other relationship, as we are, but let's just stay with coaching, as we are more grounded, as we are able to, in our own practice ourselves, able to see when we're triggered and intervene in our system and come back to neutral, that becomes a resource for our clients. I mean, how many of us have seen clients that come in that are so anxious they can't even think or be because they have a lot of anxiety, about something. And so, we're not talking about something that would be a referral out to a therapist, not that kind of clinical anxiety, but, as we calm down, that helps the client. We enter this relational field of spaciousness and presence that can help. I mean, that's a big part, I think, of being of service.
I would agree. Bebe, we've been talking for an hour. I don't know where that time went. So we're pretty
me neither.
But I've got two more questions for you. So the first is, if people would like to find out more, where can they find you online?
Yes, thank you for asking. It's presencebasedcoaching.com. No lines in there, no dashes, no dots. Presencebasedcoaching.com.
Perfect.
And we have the leadership work and the coaching work and lots of lovely resources from Doug's legacy. And
that's great. Thank you. And then do you have any last comments or thoughts, particularly about getting into the body and that side of things, but anything else or anything else about presence you'd like to leave our listeners with as a sort of parting thought?
Yes, I do. And it is the phrase we use to close, which is a quote from Viktor Frankl. I don't know if you know him. He was a Holocaust survivor, a psychiatrist, and he wrote the book, Man's Search for Meaning and Other Things. But his quote is what we try and live by, which is, and this is a partial quote, "The last of the human freedoms is the opportunity to choose your own attitude in any given set of circumstances. So it is the last of our freedoms, is to be at choice. So we can choose where we put our attention, not where our habits put our attention. So this is what Doug used to say is the keys to the kingdom. Us being at choice and in presence is, which offers us that choice, is what this is about.
That's absolutely perfect. A beautiful way to end. And yeah, thank you. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. It's been wonderful.